Coutts Bank Peter Flavel has stepped down with immediate effect. Its interim boss said the resignation was agreed by mutual consent and is the right decision for Coutts and the wider group. Mr Flavel says that in the handling of Mr Farage's case, the bank had fallen below the high standards of personal service. He's also said he bears full responsibility for the poor handling of the Farage case. In response to his resignation, Farage says it was only a matter of time. It follows the resignation of former CEO of the NatWest Group, Dame Alison Rose, who could be in line for a £5 million payoff. British gas owner Centrica has revealed that earnings at its gas and electricity supply arm have soared by 889% to £969 million in the 6 months to June. Shadow Climate Secretary Ed Miliband says the scale of the profits show that the money isn't being reinvested into energy production and is instead being funnelled back to shareholders. But the Prime Minister insists that energy companies' windfall profits are being taxed to support consumers, helping to pay around half of a typical family's energy bill.
I know that the #1 challenge families are facing up and down the country is the cost of living, and in particular their energy bills. That's why I took a decision back when I was Chancellor to introduce a windfall tax on the energy companies. So we are now taxing these windfall profits of energy companies, and we're using that money to help us pay around half of a typical family's energy bill, particularly over the last winter. That support has been worth £1,500 to a typical family. It's support on the scale of the furlough scheme, to give people context, because I know how important it is for the government and me to ease some of those pressures on the cost of living.
A man who shot dead a custody sergeant in a police cell in 2020 has been sentenced to a whole life term in prison. 25-year-old Louis de Soysa fatally shot Sergeant Matt Ratner in Croydon. De Soysa claimed diminished responsibility during the 3-week trial, but the jury took around 5 hours to unanimously convict him. The decision to release double child killer Colin Pitchfork will be re-examined by a new parole board. The 63-year-old was jailed for life after raping and strangling 2 15-year-old girls in the early 80s. He was given a minimum sentence of 30 years in 1988, later reduced to 28 years for good behaviour, and was released in 2021. Pitchfork was recalled to prison 2 months later after approaching young women in the street, which was later deemed flawed by the parole board. Tram operators have been fined a total of £14 million over the Croydon derailment, which killed 7 people. Many more were injured when a tram carrying 69 people derailed near the Sandylands stop in November 2016. Transport for London and Tram Operations Limited have accepted failing in their health and safety duties. Mr Justice Fraser told the court this was undoubtedly an accident waiting to happen. Jean Smith, the mother of Mark, who died in the tram crash, says no fines can bring her son back.
The whole sentencing was pointless. As a family, while we appreciate that both TfL and TOL admitted liability straight away, their fines are meaningless in the light of loss of life.
A High Court judge has ruled that the Duke of Sussex can bring a claim of unlawful information gathering to trial against the publisher of The Sun, but not a claim of phone hacking. Prince Harry alleges he was targeted by journalists and private investigators working for the news group newspapers. The Sun publisher says the announcement is a significant victory. The group denies any unlawful activity took place. Wildfires in Greece continue despite a drop in temperatures. Blazes have spread across the country for more than a week, killing 3 people and causing over 20,000 tourists to evacuate roads. 61 more fires have erupted in Greece in the last 24 hours, with footage showing cliffs and trees scorched by the blazes. In Albania, crews continue to battle the flames across the country's southern region, with emergency helicopters dropping water on the affected areas. In Italy, the extent of the devastation can be seen after a wildfire turned the hills surrounding a 5th-century temple into ash. And finally, no medical cause has been given for the death of Irish singer Sinead O'Connor, who was found unresponsive at her home in London yesterday. An autopsy will be conducted, with the results expected to take several weeks. The 56-year-old's death is not being treated as suspicious. TV, online, DAB Plus radio and on TuneIn. You're with GB News. Now it's back to Michelle.
Thank you for that. It is Dewbs & Co. right through till 7 with me, Michelle Dewberry. Alongside me, we've got the life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the historian and broadcaster, David Starkey. Good evening, gents.
Good evening.
And you know the drill, don't you? It's not just about us three. It's very much about you guys at home. What's on your mind tonight? Martin, you were one of the first emails that I got tonight telling me I've come dressed as a Greek N. What can I say? It's fashion. I'll leave it at that. GBviews at gbnews.com is how you can get a hold of me, or you can tweet me at GB News. Now, let's kick off with what I think is one of the most important stories going on in this country right now, because it, of course, hits our banking sector. All of us rely on our banks, and all of us deserve, of course, to trust our banks. And you'll be familiar by now that Dame Alison Rose, NatWest CEO, has stepped down, of course. But today now it's moved on because the chief executive of Coutts also is stepping down with immediate effect. Now, I've got to say, Nigel Farage, he's not having any of that. He doesn't think it's enough. He suggests that perhaps the board should go as well. Let's just have a little listen, shall we, to what he has to say.
The resignation of Dame Alison is a start. It's a start. I mean, she cannot be the only person that carries the can for a terrible decision that was made yesterday by the board of the NatWest Group. They endorsed somebody who'd broken the basic banking code of client confidentiality. They backed up her false claims that she had not revealed what the funds in my account were, which has been completely disproved by the BBC. This is gross mismanagement. So I think actually Dame Alison going isn't enough.
Well, I'm going to start with you on this one, David Starkey, because you don't mind me saying, I know this because I've checked, I'm not indiscreet when it comes to people's finances. You are a Coutts customer. So I wonder, what do you, from that perspective, make of all of these kind of strange goings on?
I'm rather surprised I haven't been cancelled as well.
Oh, right. Careful what you say.
No. Let's be serious and straightforward about this. About 2 years ago, we were written to by Peter Flavell, which said if we brought Coutts into disrepute, we would have our accounts closed. And this phrase has not been properly discussed. This phrase, bringing into disrepute, is entirely open-ended. You can put whatever content into it you want, and if you actually look at the dossier that's compiled against Nigel, what it involves doing is saying that there is only one single legitimate spectrum of opinion, which you could broadly describe as middle to far left. If you're even slightly on the right, you were not within the bounds of acceptable opinion, and two labels are put on you, as they were put on Nigel in that, or indeed put on me. You are controversial, and you're at risk of bringing people into disrepute. And can I just say, I think that what Nigel has done is very important. This is just the tip of an iceberg. It is not banks who are doing this. It is every business who is doing this, because they've all been taken over by ESG. They've all been taken over by what I think we shouldn't talk about it as, you know, whatever it normally is. We should call it DIE, diversity, inclusion and equity, because it kills every organisation. But the thing that will come out, the state. The big state, the civil service, is now operating on these principles. And I predict it will only be a matter of time when the state starts applying the same sanctions that we saw at Coutts trying to apply. This is why Nigel's struggle is not simply about banking. It's not simply about him. It's about trying to reverse our drift to a neo-Chinese society. When COVID hit, I said we would get a Chinese virus and we'd finish with a Chinese society, and we are terribly far on the way.
Daniel Moylan, your thoughts?
Well, I just want to pick up on what David said there, because in cases like this, you look to the regulator. That's the system we have. I don't think it's a very effective system. But
the FCA we're talking about?
The FCA to have stepped in and sorted this out. I mean, this is just... It's only 2 weeks since they published their new customer duty on the banks. And here was a customer who was clearly being abused in terms of that duty and not getting the service he was entitled to. And they have been totally absent. In fact, the only thing we've seen...
Hang on, let him finish. Go on.
The only thing we've seen from them is that they were comfortable, apparently, with Dame Alison Rose remaining in post. So I think that we really do need an inquiry. I mean, Nigel Farage is talking about an inquiry, pursuing the board, but we really need an inquiry into the regulator to see if they're fit for purpose.
But should the board remain?
A good example.
Should the board remain?
Well, can I just quickly pick up on what Daniel said, because it's really important.
Go on.
Do you know who was the founding chairman of the FCA?
Sir Howard Davis.
Sir Howard Davis, who is the current chairman of NatWest. Now, this is what is so stinking. There's an entire group, close-knit, circulating, and do you know what is characteristic of this group, like Howard Davis? They rise through failure. He failed at the FCA. He was a negligible deputy governor of the Bank of England. He had to resign as governor of the London School of... as director of the London School of Economics, because he was tainted... Three guesses what? With Gaddafi money. And not only was it Gaddafi money, let's just continue. The LSE actually gave Gaddafi's son a cheating PhD to get that money. Now, do we need to understand who these people are?
Well, in case you are, I mean, obviously he's not here to respond to that allegation, but in case you're wondering who Howard Davis is, I just put the board up on your screen then. So your top left-hand corner, that is Howard Davis. That is the guy that we're referring to there. Just to remind you, when Alison Rose admitted that she had indeed had that conversation with the BBC journalist, you might be familiar with the fact that it was Howard Davis that issued a statement on behalf of the NatWest Group. And I'll read it to you again. I read it at the time because I found it quite shocking, really. He was saying that after careful consideration, the board had concluded that it retained full confidence in Miss Rose as the CEO of the bank. And it's for that reason, and that reason alone, when you head that kind of board and you sit on that kind of board and you make the decision that when a senior executive has failed in their duty, when they have breached basic rule 101 of confidentiality, when you stand there with a straight face and you say they have still got, you have still got full confidence in that person, you have to look inward. You have to ask yourself, am I the person for this job? Do you think he should remain in that post, Daniel?
Well, I just want to say, if you look at that board, if you look at the independence on that board, the independent directors, they're actually, in city terms, they're quite weak. I would say this, that if you're going to give your confidence to a chief executive, but you end up chairing a board at midnight that finishes at 1:29 in the morning, then I think really your standing is such that you don't have much credibility anymore.
And I just want to say, not everybody is on the same page with this, because there have been people that are critical of Nigel Farage. There are other people, for example, that agree with the fact that actually he shouldn't be entitled to basic banking services because they disagree with his policy. Someone that was speaking out on a similar note was Emily Maitlis. You can listen to that now. Let's just remind ourselves what she had to say.
Farage made it an argument about free speech, about liberty, about censorship, when it wasn't. No one was shutting him down. No one was stopping him from banking. No one was calling him names. They simply waited until he paid off a mortgage, having decided ahead of time that they would call it quits at that point. And this isn't a public utility. It's not electricity. It's a posh, private bank. It's in the name. Yet the power of the populist somehow is to turn utter entitlement into victimhood, and that is quite the move.
See, I found that quite fascinating, because when she says this bank is not a public utility...
It just happens to be owned by us.
Yeah, nearly 40% owned by
the public.
This government owes the taxpayers.
It's also called a PLC, and the word public does come into it. But can we just understand Emily Maitlis? Emily Maitlis is a woman who straddles double standards. Just look at her performance on the whole business of her favourite, her favourite television presenter. He does something, it is was quite clear that had it been a Tory MP, she would be leading the attack. But because he's a Liberal, because he's one of theirs, this is scandalous and disgraceful. I think these people are bluntly disgraceful. There's also something else we need to take into account. And earlier this week, I was on GB News, and we were talking about Boris derangement syndrome. There is a Nigel derangement syndrome, which means that people are incapable of separating the man from the principle. And the notion that there is a principle at stake, which is the proper availability of banking, because what she said was just straightforwardly factually wrong. If you're banned by one bank, you cannot get another banking account. He tried 10
I think
banks.
what she's on about is apparently, according to NatWest, they're saying that Farage can have
Yeah, but they only offered him that after he'd tried all the... Can we get the sequence? You see, sorry, I'm a historian. Sequence of events are very important. He had the humiliating business of going to 10 other banks before there was the concession that he might be downgraded to NatWest. Now, come on.
I'll tell you what...
This woman who vindicated herself against Prince Andrew, the notion that you'd establish yourself as a champion of right against, you know, the feeblest, the intellectually most feeble member of the royal family, God, it's...
I wouldn't, out of principle, I wouldn't want my business to be within that group if they'd had these dossiers on me like that. But very briefly, final question to you, Daniel. All these execs that are quitting or leaving by mutual agreement, by the way, I find fascinating. I think they should have been fired for gross misconduct. But anyway, do you think they should be getting some kind of generous payoff on their way out or not?
It depends on the seriousness of what they've done. And breaching confidentiality is quite serious. Very quickly. I worked for a part of NatWest 30 years ago, and we'd get the NatWest Group family bulletin would come round every week, and it would say who was getting married and who'd had a baby. And at the end of it, there was a long list of people, and it simply said at the beginning, the following have been dismissed from the service of the bank. It didn't say why, but you knew. It was either because they had their fingers in the till, or because they breached confidentiality.
Was it a long list? I'm worried it's a long list.
It's quite a long list,
yeah.
and breached confidentiality, or something like that, and they would just they didn't get a payoff when they left.
You won't be able, I don't think you'd be able to get away with that in this day and age, do you reckon? At the end, like a daily bulletin, a weekly, monthly bulletin of all the people that have been fired or let go or whatever. Do you think
For
that'd
gross misconduct.
Yeah, but do you reckon that would pass in
misconduct.
today's society where you can't even say something
If you commit gross
banter-wise?
misconduct, you don't have a lot of rights.
Well, there you
the
go.
basic
Your
fact.
thoughts on that? What do you make to it all? Do you think we should draw a line now, or do you think the board or the chairman, or all of them, quite frankly, should be the next out of the door? Now, coming up, I've got a lot I want to discuss with you, not least gas. Have you seen this? British Gas, they have declared a massive profit. It makes me laugh because it is just ridiculous. It's nearly £1 billion in 6 months. What do you make to this? Is it all right, all fair in capitalism, or does something need to be done? If so, what?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back. Michelle Dewberry till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got Lord Daniel Moylan and the historian and broadcaster David Starkey. In the break, Daniel Moylan was just pointing out to me that a viewer had got in touch with him saying the weather was rubbish and putting in a personal request for Daniel to wear something, a tie, that was bright and summery, but he can't remember who the person was that asked him. So he wants it to be noted that you've...
I've done my best, Michelle.
Yes.
I've done my best.
So who is that viewer that requested that, and are you satisfied? Has he done good? Has the man stepped up and delivered in his summery attire? I want your thoughts. Very important that is tonight. Not as quite as important though, of the fact that British Gas have reported its highest ever first half profits. Are you ready? Are you sitting comfortably, everyone? So when you perhaps have been sitting there, you're too terrified to put your heating on when it needed to be on. I heard a story, terrible story today, of a lady that eats cold food at the moment because she doesn't want to be using her gas stove and hob and all the rest of it. When you hear stories like that and then you hear the other side of the fence, which is 6 months' profit of £969 million, you've got to admit something really is going wrong, isn't it? I'm talking about British Gas. People are all over with this. Some people saying there should be more tax on British Gas, other people saying there should be rebates to consumers. Where do you stand?
Well, first of all, I'm actually rather pleased that a British company is doing well. It'd be nice if there were a few. The second thing is, I understand we're taxing these people at 75%, and the bigger the profit they make, the more. And we could make it 100%. We could do what the Labour Party might want to do, make it 100% and close them down completely. But we're already close to that. We're at 75%, I believe. And the third thing I want to say is that really what people are driving at is price controls. And once you start introducing price controls, you're back in the Soviet Union. You set the prices by the state sets the prices, and you know what you get with the Soviet economy. You get rubbish products. So no reliability, nothing works. So I think we've got to be really careful about where we go on this. This is a level of profit that was already allowed by the regulator. We either come back to regulators. It's a rotten system. We have an absent regulator in the case of Coutts and NatWest, and now we've got a regulator that agreed to this, and that's fine, but you can't blame British Gas for it.
Where do you stand, David?
I am on Daniel's side, and I would go further. The problem is our entire power market, gas and electricity, is a rigged market. It's rigged by the state. And it also does, essentially because we subscribe to the absurd notions of net zero, it actually delivers, and can we all get this straight? We pay 3 times as much for basic fuel as people in France or in America. One of the reasons that our industry has collapsed and has been exported overseas is because our fuel costs are so gigantically high. Can we also, again, understand that, gas prices are important, electricity electricity prices are actually much more important. And we have an insane system of pricing, which is called marginal net pricing. The reason our electricity prices are so gigantic is, however it's generated, the cost to everybody is the unit of electricity which is most expensive. This is done, remember, the entire structure of our pricing has been rigged to favour so-called renewables. We've all got to start to recognise what is going on. We sit on one of the world's largest supplies of hydrocarbons. The reason that gas prices are so high is that we will not redevelop the North Sea and we will not do fracking. This is why we are dependent on a global market. If you look in America, they are primarily self-generating in terms of power. We have willed this on ourselves by the follies of obeisance to global warming. And so everything that we are doing now is going to lead to prices going higher and higher, people being able to travel less and less, being able to keep their homes less warm, because, of course, the entire business of heat pumps and whatever involves substituting an efficient method of heating for an inefficient method.
One of my
heating.
viewers, Mark, he says, I'm a British gas customer, Michelle. He finds the cost of his energy reasonable, but what he's saying is he finds the standing charge something that he kind of balks at. What you described at the opening of your segment there is you're basically saying this is free markets and it is what it is. Let's all celebrate a successful business. By the way, many of us have pension funds, etc., that are invested in these companies as well. But other people will watch this and they will say, yes, this is capitalism working as it should. But when it comes to utilities, is there an argument now to say that utilities shouldn't be commercial endeavours, that they perhaps should be nationalised, renationalised?
I didn't say it was free markets, because, as David said, the prices are rigged by the state.
But it's capitalism, isn't it?
No, not really capitalism. It's capital without the ism. The truth is...
It's ism without the capital.
It's private
Well, it's a rip-off, is what some people say.
Exactly.
It's private sector capital being deployed at the direction of the state.
Precisely.
Effectively. It's capital without the capitalism. But what I am saying is you shouldn't blame British Gas for this, because these have been prices set. They've been allowed to charge because that's the price cap set by the regulator. If you want something else and you want to go down the road of actually telling them exactly how much they can earn, you get closer and closer to a Soviet society.
Well, what do you make to it all? Are you happy with what you pay? Do you even think about what you're paying until you hear of these profits, or do you just think that is the way the cookie crumbles? Your thoughts on all of that? And we speak, of course, don't we, about energy, and people will talk about renewables, but you need the sun to shine and the wind to blow to make that happen. Let's take a look, shall we, at the weather.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. There has been a fair amount of cloud around today, and we are holding on to that into the overnight period as well. A lot of cloudy skies, some clear spells trying to poke their way through, but the cloud definitely the dominating weather variable. The cloud will be thick enough for some outbreaks of drizzle throughout the night, some longer spells of rain for North East Scotland as well. For Northern Ireland, South West Scotland, a few clearer spells developing, and it's here where temperatures will drop down a little bit more, but elsewhere underneath that cloud it is going to be another humid, muggy night, no lower than 15-16 degrees Celsius in some towns and cities. But it's this fresher air that's filtering in from the southwest that will also steadily progress its way eastwards throughout the day, and that's going to allow the cloud to break up a lot more compared to what we saw throughout today. So more in the way of those brighter and sunnier spells developing. Still a scattering of showers, generally on the lighter side, most persistent for parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures in those sunnier spots between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into the weekends, though, our attention turns to this area of low pressure that's going to be slowly pushing its way in from the northwest. So things turning more unsettled again. Those occluded fronts bringing bands of showers our way. Some of those could turn heavy with some hail and thunderstorms in the mixture, perhaps more persistently for Northern Ireland, parts of northwest Scotland on Saturday. Still some sunny spells in between those showers, but the breeze will be picking up for all of us and quite a blustery day to come, remaining unsettled throughout the rest of the weekend and into the start of the new working week as well. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
I've got so much coming up in my programme for you tonight. A couple of things for you to ponder. Shoplifting, we all know it's not great, and of course it is illegal, but when it comes to policing priorities, how much should they put the emphasis on shoplifting? That is my first question. Second question, if you get released from prison where you've been wrongfully convicted, do you think if you get compensation, there should be a deduction from that amount of money to take care of your board and lodgings whilst you're inside? Ponder that.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Still alongside me, Daniel Moylan and David Starkey. There are so many compliments coming in for you two tonight that I'm starting to wonder whether or not you've been paying people.
No, we wrote them ourselves.
Did you?
Come
Yeah.
on, do it yourself.
Did you program them to fire off whilst you're on air from all different email addresses? Pam says, I'm really enjoying the evening's discussions. Brilliant pairings. I am smiling, actually smiling, listening and viewing. They can come again, she says. She welcomes you back again. Sylvia, talking about the British gas stuff. You're not having any of it, Sylvia. You're saying these are not profits these companies are making. They're daylight robbery, ill-gotten gains. You're saying it's our money and it should be paid back to you. Well, who's going to provide the service then? Do you not think people deserve a profit for delivering a service to you? You tell me. Philip says that utilities should be back in public ownership. Doug says, what a waste of time arguing about all the profits that these firms make because he says nothing will ever change. Is that true or not? Lots to talk to you about as well when it comes to law and order in a second, but also you won't be able to believe your ears, everybody, because Keir Starmer has finally, I don't know how long it's taken him, but he finally can tell you what a woman is, and I'll give you that answer by the end of the show. But But today, the Co-op has said that certain communities could become what they call no-go zones. That is so tricky for the whole accent, I can tell you. Anyway, they're saying it's all about the extraordinary rates of shoplifting. They reckon that 71% of retail crime is not responded to by the police. If I broaden this out from just the Co-op example, Daniel, and I start to think about shoplifting, you know, per se in society, they're saying it's not a priority. How much of a priority do you think it should be?
I think the first thing to notice...
For police, by the way.
Yeah, I think the first thing to notice is that for a lot of people, shoplifting has become normalised. It's no longer something that is... there isn't a moral clock anymore in their minds telling them that this is something that is shameful and embarrassing and they shouldn't be doing. It's, if you can get away with it, it's all right. And it's that collapse in a moral sense that I think is really at the bottom of all this that worries me so much. Should the police be making a priority of it? It's very, very difficult, isn't it? I think on short, sharp exercises where they might actually do something and catch some people for a matter of weeks focused in a certain area is the sort of thing that might put enough people off for a while. But to say that this is more important than knife crime or murders and even burglaries in your house, I think is probably not right, because the shops, they can insure themselves, they do calculate the amount of wastage, which is another word often for shoplifting, that goes on in it. And I can't myself see that this would be a priority, although it might be the subject, as I say, of specific short-term interventions to try and show people they will get caught and punished.
David?
I think what Daniel is failing to recognise is that there are two kinds of shoplifting. One is the kind of casual slip it into your pocket or whatever, which of course has been enormously facilitated by automatic checkout and whatever, and the removal of a direct person-to-person connection. It's all been part of the depersonalisation of so much service and so much business. But what the Co-op, if we look at this carefully, is talking about is something completely different. It is the equivalent, they call it looting. They are gangs that burst into a shop and do it. In fact, there was a case, a shop 3 times in one day in East London. I think the great difficulty of this is they're afraid to say where, and they're afraid to say who was doing it. I suspect we can guess. There is, unfortunately, a deliberate Wild Westery that has overtaken certain communities. This is why the Co-op has been using extraordinarily careful language, and I'm trying to use it now for very obvious reasons. But it is quite clear that in some areas of London, particularly in other large cities, the contempt for law, the contempt for property is getting to such a stage that, as the Co-op point out, they will become areas where there are not shops. It will not be worth keeping them open because of the scale of losses. And I think we really need, again, to contemplate what this means. I mean, there's already a sense, and all sorts of people have written about this in different contexts, that there are certain areas which do become quasi-no-go areas. And what I think the Co-op is trying to do, and remember, it's the Co-op. This is not Sainsbury's. This is not, some big money-grubbing institution. This is a body which is affiliated to the Labour Party, right? Can we just get this clear? It's affiliated to the Labour Party. It has a profound social conscience. It deliberately tries to have stores in areas which are poor. All of these things, it is highlighting this, and it's doing it for a reason. And do you know what? We need to recognise it.
Well, as well, shoplifting, it does affect. You've seen so many stores, haven't you? I think it was it Waitrose the other day that was saying we should show shoplifters love or something like that? Am I missing something? You say that people perhaps losing their moral conscience, I would say. It's all about, a lot of this is to do with social media, where looting, shoplifting is glorified. They run into these stores, they sweep off the shelves, they film themselves and their mates doing it. They think they get this kudos because they're going around robbing, because they know that nobody will do anything, because you try being a security guard and laying your mitt on one of these people, they'll have you in that court done for assault quicker than a quick thing from Quickland. It's all a mess, isn't it? But what is the answer? You tell me. I want to move on quickly, if I may, here to another law and order story because I found this one absolutely fascinating. You'll be familiar perhaps with the story of Andrew Malkinson. He has been released from prison after a 20-year fight for justice, 17 years after he was convicted. His conviction was overturned. Fresh DNA evidence basically linked somebody else to the crime. So he is now a free man. Hopefully some compensation will be coming his way. But the thing that I found quite interesting, Daniel, and I confess I didn't know this before, when you are wrongfully put into prison for a period of time, and if you do indeed get compensation, there is a situation where you can have a potential deduction to cover the costs of your, I quote, board and lodgings for the duration that you've been incarcerated. What do you think to that?
Well, I think it sounds completely bonkers, but I think you've got to be a little bit careful because, as I understand it, this is money that's in the prison service is entitled to, effectively from the government. The compensation is coming from the government. And what I understand is that the compensation is calculated to take account of that deduction. Now, you could do it another way, and you'd say, well, don't mix it up with the compensation.
Yeah.
Pay him the compensation and pay the prison service separately, but then he'd get smaller compensation. That's the logic of it. So I think you need to be careful how much of this is a mad accountant running his figures in a certain way and how much of it is a genuine injustice. And I think that needs a bit more looking into before we get too on our high horse about it.
What do you make to this?
I think that there's another much bigger question in this. This man was sentenced to a minimum of 7 years. He spends this extraordinary amount of time in jail because he won't admit that he did a crime that he didn't do. And this is a profound perversion of our system of justice, that it requires you to be released to admit that what you did. In other words, it penalises the innocent, it penalises the man who suffered monstrous injustice. I think this is an utter scandal. Again, it's the Manchester police, riddled with corruption from top to bottom. And in these cases, I think that the entire processes of compensation are profoundly inadequate. But what they should involve, of course, is the police who've been involved being stripped of their pensions, and everything else that they've acquired. I mean, again, this has been something we were talking about, the whole business of Coutts Bank and whatever. If you compare America, if you compare Ireland, and you look at what was done to the bankers after the financial crisis of 2008, many of them went to jail. And they went to jail correctly, and they should have done, and they suffered terrible financial penalties as well. Nobody paid anything. Even Fred Goodwin, who drove NatWest into the ground, emerged with his pension rights and his share options absolutely intact. This is intolerable.
I hear you, and I'm sure many people will agree. Of course, the police force would say they're not here to defend themselves. They would argue, by the way, that they're not riddled from top to bottom with corruption or whatever the wording was. That's David's opinion. When it comes to board and lodgings costs, I do often ponder to myself, if you do go and commit crimes and all the rest of it, and you do have to go and live courtesy of Her Majesty's prison, or sorry, His Majesty's prison, why shouldn't you have to pay back some form of board and lodgings when you work? You get a job in prison, can't you? You can work and earn money.
This man has suffered a monstrous injustice.
No, I'm not about him. I'm talking about when you have been guilty. I'm not about this guy.
No, of course.
I'm not going to charge this guy.
Sorry, I was.
No, I'm just saying.
Absolutely, I agree completely.
I'm saying when you're a guilty criminal, not this guy. Even I wouldn't go back and charge him rent. But what I'm saying is, for these people that are guilty and have been guilty of crimes, when you're in and you get your wages, your prison money, whatever you want to call it, why isn't there a deduction taken for their board and lodgings?
Yeah, to be fair, Michelle, you're not actually paid market wages working in prison. So what is left over for you as cash from working in prison?
It's just pocket money.
Oh, these lefties. What can I say?
The one thing you can't accuse either of us as being is a lefty.
I'm teasing. Right, look, I'll tell you who is a lefty. Keir Starmer, and you won't believe your ears when you hear what he's had to say. He can finally say what a woman is. I mean, my 2-year-old's been able to say this for quite some time, but Keir Starmer has finally caught up. I'll give you his answer in a couple of minutes.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello there, this is Dewbs & Co. Michelle Dewberry till 7 o'clock, live here in the House of Lords. Daniel Moylan and historian and broadcaster David Starkey. Lots of love for these two through the inbox tonight. Speaking of shoplifting, Jackie in Middlesbrough, she says, we've lost our co-op through theft, Michelle. She goes on to talk about the shopping precinct where she lives. She says all of the shops there, including the charity shop, have been subject to theft. I mean, you've got to be a special kind of, well, scumbag, basically, to go robbing charity shops. Like, I don't condone shoplifting anyway, by the way, before I get myself into trouble, but charity shops? Who goes around doing that? Appalling, if you ask me. Lots of people are saying that the police just do not want to know when it comes to prioritising shoplifting, but in the grand scheme of things, should they be? Or are there other things to focus on? I'll talk you through what I want to focus on in a minute. Are you all sitting down? Are you comfortable? I don't want you to have a funny turn because, are you ready? A miracle has occurred.
Well, look, firstly, a woman is an adult female, so let's clear that one up.
Goodness gracious me, can you believe that? A miracle, I told you, wasn't I? A miracle has occurred. He's finally managed to say with a straight face something that literally my 2-year-old could probably have told him. Someone said, Phil says he just needed a night out with a whole woman many years ago, Kirsten, and that would have put him on the right track, says Phil, not me.
You see, I think you are missing a terrible trick here.
What is it?
What we should be doing, Michelle, we should be asking how, after so many years and months, he's actually come to this conclusion. question, is it as a result of investigation? Did he use the MPs of the Labour Party as a representative sample? Well, if you remember before, he said 99% of women did not have a penis. Now, how was he able to eliminate the 1% that did? I mean, seriously, this shows a man who has no principle, a man who will say anything that he thinks will get him into Downing Street, a man on whose word you cannot rely. And just repeatedly at the moment, we're seeing this with Starmer. Everybody is sort of trying to draw the contrast between Boris Johnson and Starmer. There's a single difference between them. Boris smiles when he lies, Starmer scowls.
Poor blimey, harsh words. Daniel, thoughts?
Well, I think the big question is, how long is it going to last? I mean, he changes his opinion so frequently. Could we have him back on the screen in a few months saying something else? I mean, he had so many left-wing policies in order to get elected leader of the Labour Party. If you open The Guardian now, which I do occasionally, there's only 3 copies.
Swoon!
And you read the commentators in The Guardian, all the ones who thought he'd be a great leader of the Labour Party, they've all turned against him. Everybody on the left has turned against him because he's changed his policies. And you can't believe, as David says, a word he says, there is no principle there at all. And I just wonder, I mean, this is so obviously self-seeking. And if it suited him to change his opinion in a few months' time, he would. That's the problem.
Yeah, and of course, you've seen that kind of U-turn, whatever you want to call it, in terms of how easy it should be to self-ID and change. And I've got to say, for me personally, as a woman, yes, I am indeed a woman, I think that
evidence.
I know, I think, Daniel, I'm calling you Daniel David. It's not even 7 o'clock. There will be no evidence provided. You'll just have to take my word for it. Anyway, for me personally, as a female, as a woman, this is one of the most important topics to cross the political kind of landscape at the moment, because I do not want a man in a dress telling me that he is a woman in my space. I likewise do not want my little boy to be indoctrinated to believe that if he decides that he's actually a little girl, then don't you worry about that. We'll give you
He waves a magic wand
off.
and puts a skirt on with a little skirt star
on his head. Honestly,
but sorry, you see, I think there's something even bigger. It is, do we actually believe that there are things called objective facts or not? And it is perfectly clear that the left disbelieves in a notion of objective fact. And what you're seeing with Starmer is this kind of awkward nudging towards it. We know, of course, he doesn't really believe in balanced budgets. They believe that money comes from the sky. That's why he backed Corbyn. That's why he was in bed with the whole of that absurd business. That's why Rachel Reeves has been producing this extraordinary charm offensive with the city, and the fools have bought into it.
Last word from you, Daniel.
Fools.
Yeah, I think anyone who takes Starmer's word and believes it's going to be translated into action has plenty of reason and experience for believing that's actually not going to be the case, and they are fools to think it's so.
Yeah, I can tell you, I find this such a serious topic. Don't get me started, because Nigel Farage is up next, and once I get onto this topic, honestly, I do. You talk about objective facts, by the way. If we start saying that actually a man is a woman and vice versa, I always worry, well, where do you draw the line then? Because
there isn't a line.
What will it be next? A grown man who reckons that actually inside he's a teenager and therefore wants to be in a school, and people will just sit there and just to go along with it, so they don't cause offence. Not on my watch, I can tell you. Anyway, look, Penny says that this has been the highlight of her day. We appreciate that. Lots of people as well getting in touch about what your point about people rising to the top on a background of failure and them not appreciating it. Anyway, look, time has flown. Lots of compliments from you guys. You did a great job in emailing about yourself on different email addresses. Good work. But I've really enjoyed the show. I've enjoyed your company, and of course I've enjoyed your company at home too. Do not go anywhere, because Nigel Farage is up next, and something tells me that he will have a little bit to say when it comes to the whole banking situation. He's out and about as well, so don't go anywhere, and I'll see you tomorrow. Night-night.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. There's been a fair amount of cloud around today and we are holding on to that into the overnight period as well. A lot of cloudy skies, some clear spells trying to poke their way through, but the cloud definitely the dominating weather variable. The cloud will be thick enough for some outbreaks of drizzle throughout the night, some longer spells of rain for North East Scotland as well. For Northern Ireland, South West Scotland, a few clearer spells developing, and it's here where temperatures will drop down a little bit more, but elsewhere underneath that cloud it is going to be another humid, muggy night, no lower than 15, 16 degrees Celsius in some towns and cities. But it's this fresher air that's filtering in from the southwest that will also steadily progress its way eastwards throughout the day, and that's going to allow the cloud to break up a lot more compared to what we saw throughout today. So more in the way of those brighter and sunnier spells developing. Still a scattering of showers generally on the lighter side, most persistent for parts of Northern Ireland. Temperatures in those sunnier spots between 20 and 24 degrees Celsius. Into the weekends, though, our attention turns to this area of low pressure that's going to be slowly pushing its way in from the northwest. So things turning more unsettled again. Those occluded fronts bringing bands of showers our way. Some of those could turn heavy with some hail and thunderstorms in the mixture, perhaps more persistently for Northern Ireland, parts of northwest Scotland on Saturday. Still some sunny spells in between those showers, but the breeze will be picking up for all of us and quite a blustery day to come, remaining unsettled throughout the rest of the weekend and into the start of the new working week as well. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.